Hi everyone. Today we are at chapter 6 with VANYA, a true story by Myrna Grant. Chapter 6, Fear not the law, but the judge. Although the regulation bunk beds were only 2 feet wide and hard, Ivan stretched out between the sheets and beneath a blanket and thanked God for the luxury. For the first time in 1971, he was in bed. No hours in the cold. No interrogations in the snow, in the officers' rooms. No watching the moon set behind the tiny park in the central square. Even before taps were sounded, Ivan was blissfully asleep. Although he had only heard it once before, the voice was familiar, and Ivan was instantly awake. "Vanya, arise!" In a second he was on his feet, between the bunks, gazing at the crystal brilliance of the angel. His mind was working rapidly. He was aware that no sleeping soldier in the rows of bunks stirred. Mechanically, he began to pull up his trousers and feel for his shoes, his eyes never leaving the radiant loveliness of the being before him. The angel's gaze was so full of love, he felt no fear. In an instant, they began to rise, and effortlessly the ceiling opened, and then the barracks roof, and even the angel flew through time and space to another world. The grass was deep and lush, and seemed to stretch to the very horizon of this unfamiliar planet. It was a fresh and vivid green. Dazed, Ivan followed the angel, and after what seemed a long time, they came to a brook. Its waters were as clear as glass, so Ivan could see to the bed of the stream, and the brightness of the water dazzled his eyes. The angel passed over the brook without effort and turned questioningly when Ivan held back. "Why do you fear, Vanya?" The voice was unhurried and tender. Inexplicably, a horror of snakes had entered Ivan's mind. Snakes! As he said the word, his glance moved through thick grass under his feet. The strangeness of what was happening gripped him in an unreasoning fear. Although the angel was a distance from him, Ivan heard his voice, as if the shining creature was standing by his side. "Do not be afraid. You are with me. Here it is not as on the earth. Here there are no snakes." As suddenly as it had come, the fear left him, and Ivan moved easily over the brook. In the brilliance of this world, every detail of blade of grass and petal of flower stood out as if flood-lit. The patterns of the bark upon the trees were indescribably beautiful. The expanse of the branches were profoundly graceful, so luminous that the light seemed to pour from within each tree. Instinctively, Ivan lifted his eyes to the sky, gazing in every direction. There was no sun. When his eyes returned to the angel, there was a form beside the being, more exalted and at the same time somehow more loving in his brilliance than even the angel. In some way, the angel seemed to do him difference, and even knew him to be the Apostle John. Through the angel, the apostle communicated with him, even stood transfixed, his mind absorbing every holy word. A series of 3 beings followed the apostle, recognized in some mysterious way Evan's concentration and so overwhelming, recognized in some mysterious way by Evan to be David, Moses, and Daniel. So intense was Evan's concentration and so overwhelming his awe and joy that when the last form was gone, Evan felt he would fall into a deep sleep. But the angel, now alone in the streaming light, spoke again. We have travelled a long way, and you are tired. Come and sit. The tree under which Evan sat was large and welcoming, with a fragrance that reminded him in some unexplained way of the grape fields of Moldavia. If the angel had not spoken again, Evan felt he would be content to sit forever, smelling the tree and looking at the landscape in the sparkling light. I wish to show you the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, but if you see it as it is, you cannot remain in the body you now have, and there is still much work for you left on earth. There seemed a silence before the angel resumed speaking. We will fly together to another planet, and I will show you the light of this city, for you know, while you are yet alive in your earth body, that in certainty there is a new Jerusalem. In an instant they flew to another planet where there were high mountains. Again, the glory of the light illuminated with every detail of this world. Evan's gaze rested on diamond streams coursing down the mountain slopes into the mists that rose from vividly green valleys. When they had come to a very deep canyon, the angel and Ivan descended until they were at the bottom. The angel seemed a flame of joy, the voice more ceremonious and jubilant than Ivan had yet heard it. Vanya, look upward, and you will see the light of the new Jerusalem. At the first glance, Ivan recoiled in dismay. The brilliance was so intense that even though he had seen it only for a second, he was sure he had been blinded. The angel spoke immediately. Nothing will happen to you. Look. No man rescued from a desert even drank water more thirstily than even drank in that splendor of the light. So great was its power that it could be felt, tasted, and heard. The sight of it was not a sensation in his eyes, but of his whole being. Even could have wept with grief and disappointment when the angel said, The time has come to fly back to earth. At the instant that Evan's feet touched the floor beside his bunk, 3 things happened. The angel disappeared, the bugle for reveal sounded, and the lights in the room were snapped on. Staring stupidly at his neat bed and himself fully dressed, Ivan heard a gentle laugh from the bunk beside him. Gregory Fedorovich Shrenik, his neighbor, was also a Moldavian and took a fraternal interest in his strange countryman. Now, Shrenik was pulling himself expertly out of his bunk, and shoving his feet into his trousered legs, he whispered in a conspirational tone, "Vanya, where were you last night?" With a tremendous effort, Ivan pulled his thoughts together. The barrack was alive, with bodies hurtling past his bunk to the door. Good-natured bantering, the groaning of exhausted soldiers, the flash of uniforms seemed unreal. He turned to look intently at Cherning. "You don't mean that you didn't see me getting undressed and into bed last night? We turned in the same time." Cherning was buttoning his shirt rapidly. "You went to bed the same time as I did, all right, and to sleep too. But you didn't sleep long. I woke up about 3 a.m. and your bunk was empty. Vanya, you were nowhere in this room." Reaching for his jacket, he gave Ivan a sly smile. "Of all people, did you actually go AWOL last night?" He did not dream. He had not been dreaming. He had journeyed with an angel. Excitement tore through Ivan like electricity. They were moving hurriedly to the door. His voice shook as he spoke. "Let's ask the duty officer if anyone left during the night." The duty officer was indignant. "Certainly no one left the room. Get going. Are you trying to get me arrested?" Ivan and Grigory Cherning moved out into the morning, both in silence. Finally, Cherning broke the spell of strangeness with a question, and Ivan began to tell him about the angel. By that evening, Ivan's account had spread through the unit. Nobody believed it. Cherning thought with satisfaction. Nobody believed it, Cherning thought with satisfaction. In spite of Ivan's sincerity, his stories were impossible. Yet they contained a mystery that made everyone uncomfortable. How was it possible to go 5 days without food and not be ill? How could a man stand in below zero frost for hours and not be cold? And if Ivan Vasilievich had not left the barracks all night, yet was not in his room, where did he go? Cherning stretched on his bunk. 4 hours of free time a month was too precious to waste on daydreaming. He reached for a pencil and paper. He would write home, but he remained on his back, staring at the ceiling. Perhaps the polished rock would get to the bottom of it. For a full month, they had been relentlessly questioning Ivan until Grigory wondered how he could remain sane under the pressure. For most men, army life was a merciless ordeal as it was. They were kept in a run all day long from 6 a.m. reveille to the 10 p.m. taps. And when they all should have been sleeping, there were the night battle alarms. How they dreaded the siren in the early hours of the morning that pulled them out of bed and propelled them half-conscious into a simulated enemy attack in the frozen night. Cherning had a score to settle with the army for what had happened at the last alarm. Snow had been falling so tightly he had been unable to see the way. Straining his eyes to peer through the swirling snow, he had plunged into an open well. Shouting over the wind and snow and hanging onto the sides of the well for his life, Grigory had been dragged out by a fellow soldier. With the water freezing on his valenki, his trouser legs stiff as cement, he had gone through the maneuvers shaking violently with the cold. But they were never awakened only once in a night, Speechless with cold and exhaustion, the men would fall into their bunks only to be aroused again an hour or so later to repeat the whole pandemonium. Gregory had lost count, but from his initial furious records, he had intended to produce them for his family on his first leave. He knew the alarms were sounded every second or third night. It was unscientific to expect men to train and study the next day on 3 or 4 hours sleep. How Ivan Vasilievich bore up under the constant interrogation in addition to the regular schedule Gregory could not imagine. He had seen Ivan summoned from meals, from study periods, from sleep. Day or night, it didn't matter. Ivan's bunk was often empty these nights. He was in trouble, all right. There had been too many incidents, too many unexplainable happenings. Perhaps Chernink didn't agree that the Baptists were enemies of the state, but it was certain they were fanatical and foolish. One didn't argue with the Red Army. It was hopeless to think one could withstand. If an officer said cabbages were sunflowers, they were sunflowers. In a way, perhaps it came down to a question of obedience. Perhaps that was why the Politruk was dealing so decisively with Moseev. After all, in a maneuver, where would any of them be if one of them wouldn't obey orders? Chernink stretched again in his bunk, the paper and pencil for his letter still idle on the coarse blanket. He had heard from one of the men in his unit that the commissar of the whole Crimean Politruk was visiting Colonel Molson. There was talk that Moseev would be sent to the military detention center in Sverdlovsk in the Urals. With a determination to put it out of his mind, Chernink seized his pencil. It had nothing to do with him. It certainly was not related to his telling the men Ivan's story about going up to another planet with an angel. Ivan spoke openly to anyone about God or his angels. Writing furiously, Chernink tried to forget. Last evening, walking back to the barracks from a field drill, he had been afraid to look deeply into the night sky. The landscape had long withdrawn into winter as the train jolted from side to side along the icy tracks. Fields, woods, small lakes, ravines glided past the half-open sliding door of the special railway car used for military prisoners. Wooden benches were piled in a shelf formation along the sides and center of the car where the prisoners sat or slept in the airless dusk. Some quarreling, some chatting, most wrapped in their own bitter thoughts. Ivan stayed close to the partially open door, breathing in the cold air and ignoring the arguments that sprang up from time to time about the doors closing or remaining open. A sense of deep peace pervaded the sweep of the land that drifted dreamlike before his view. The guard, a private from a base outside of Moscow, leaned against the shuddering walls of the car, his gun slung loosely over his arm, his head nodding in sleep. Waves of irritability rippled over the crowd of prisoners, came to nothing, and ebbed away. Ivan felt himself to be suspended between the mixture of soldiers behind him in the car and the remote countryside. His mind reviewed the attempts to demonstrate his determination to be a good soldier. In his political sessions, He had made a point of explaining that the Bible taught believers to love the country in which they live, to respect its authorities, and to give them all that is due. Instead of success, his efforts had resulted in his being pulled out of his bunk in the middle of the night and driven over frozen back roads to the prison train bound for Sverdlovsk, a military prison 2,000 kilometers in the direction of Siberia. They had left the plains of central Russia as they journeyed east, and even watched the dusky blue curves of snow hills rising in the twilight. Only 2 days before he had been brought before the area commissar, Major Andrei Dolotov from Simferopol. Dolotov's almond-shaped eyes had been gloomy as they viewed Ivan. He seemed a strangely passive and unhurried man for an officer in such high position, and he had a withdrawn and a secretive manner that gave his bulky body the appearance of a wall. His way of speaking was emotionless and hushed. He had seemed mildly surprised that Ivan had been in the Red Army for nearly 2 months and still had not adapted to army life. He had reviewed his records. Every effort had been made to rehabilitate Moiseyev, to give him opportunity to change his views, to reform politically, but he had refused to cooperate. His file contained complaints from Odessa, from the Politburo of Kerch, from the officers and the men of Moiseyev's own unit. There had been the problem of Moiseyev spreading his subversive ideas among the other men, so that they were becoming contaminated with his undesirable ideology. This was, of course, in direct violation of orders from the Polit officers. Dolotov was curious as to why Moiseyev would not obey. His voice was so quiet, Ivan was unsure he had finished speaking, and hesitated a moment. There was an oppressiveness in the room that made it hard to think. Ivan suddenly felt that he needed air. With a great effort, he prayed briefly and took a breath. His head suddenly cleared as he addressed himself to Dolotov. Comrade Commissar, the Bible teaches believers to obey the authorities placed over them. It is my deep desire to do this, but the Bible further teaches us that our Supreme Master is God. His authority demands from us complete obedience and commitment. I beg of you to understand that I have 2 sets of loyalties: loyalty to the state and loyalty to God. If I am commanded to do something that would cause me to disobey God, then I am obliged to put my loyalty to Him first. A dark flicker of change passed over the commissar's face, and he seemed to ponder an idea before he spoke. You are bound and shackled by the Baptist ideas. Very well. Perhaps it would be helpful to you to experience the seriousness of your position if you had a taste of real prison. It is possible such a procedure will be more effective than all the re-education programs in Kerch. Then we will see if you do not change your story. Why the commissar had chosen such a far-flung place, even could not guess. There were prisons close by on the Black Sea. Perhaps the ordeal of such a long journey in the dead of winter was part of the strategy. Even inhale deeply. The air coming in the train door had somehow changed. It seemed heavier, with a chemical sharpness. Behind him in the car there was a stirring. People began gathering their things more closely about them. An old man produced a rope from the inside of a lumpy blanket and began deftly tying the blanket into a bundle. A burly Cossack finished off the pan of melted snow that rocked on the floor in front of the small heater. An unshaven sergeant cursed as the train lurched suddenly. Two young soldiers, their eyes hard with anger, stood together. In the far distance, almost melting into the deep twilight, even could see a forest of smokestacks pouring black clouds into the sky. Here and there, tongues of orange flame seemed to lick the heavens. The old man hunched behind Ivan at the door, peering out ahead of the train as far as he could see. Sverdlovsk, the city of the rich. His words were spoken in the lifting, questioning accent of Odessa. Worker and warrior. Well, I'm to be both there, and so are you, comrade. The guard, now roused from his dozing, pushed the old soldier roughly from the door and stationed himself beside Ivan without comment. The engine began to brake. Shuddering, the train rattled and bumped over switches. The men crowded as close as they dared to the open door, straining to see the city, eager for the end of the tedium of the long journey. A pale star twinkled above a row of firs along the side of the track. Ivan watched its gentle light. His mind stirred, remembering a fragment of scripture that his father loved. And those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of the heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Next time, chapter 7. See you.